There is a hallway in southern Russia where sound does not travel the way it should. Footsteps land and then vanish. Voices are swallowed before they reach the next wall. The air is still, permanently still, as though the building itself has stopped breathing. At the end of that hallway, behind a steel door reinforced with a second steel door behind it, and a third steel door behind that, a man stands motionless beside a concrete bed. He has been standing in rooms like this one for hours already today. Many hours. He is not permitted to sit, not permitted to rest. He will stand for 16 hours before he is finally allowed to lie down. And tomorrow, he will stand again. He does not know exactly how the sunlight looks outside today, because the window in his cell is designed to show only a small rectangle of sky. No horizon, no trees, no ground. Just a gray square of light that tells him nothing except that somewhere beyond these walls, the world continues without him. His name is Vladimir Nikolayevich Nikolayev. He was born on March 16, 1959, in Novosibirsk, in what was then the Soviet Union. He is now 65 years old. And for the rest of his natural life, that small rectangle of sky may be the only version of the outside world he will ever see again. This is not a story about what he did. Enough has been written about that, and the courts have spoken. This is a story about what happens after. After the verdict. After the cameras leave. After the public forgets your name. This is a story about what it means to live inside a sentence that has no end, in a place specifically designed to ensure that end never comes. Vladimir Nikolayev's path to this cell began decades ago. His first conviction came in 1980 for theft and robbery. He was 21 years old. For the next 17 years, he moved in and out of the Soviet and then the Russian prison system. Short sentences, parole, release, reoffending. A cycle that many young men in the chaos of post-Soviet Russia found themselves trapped in. He was known as an alcoholic, violent when drinking, increasingly unstable. And then, in 1997, during a 7-month period out of prison, something changed. Vladimir Nikolayev committed 2 murders. The details of those crimes were so severe, so disturbing in their nature that when the case went to trial, the prosecution described acts that went beyond murder into territory that most people cannot and should not be asked to imagine. He was convicted not only of killing 2 people, but of crimes that involved extreme desecration of their remains. The court had no difficulty reaching its verdict. On the evidence presented, on the confession Nikolayev himself provided, the judgment was unanimous. He was sentenced to death by firing squad. But Russia, in the late 1990s, was undergoing a transformation. In 1999, the country imposed a moratorium on the death penalty as part of its entry into the Council of Europe. Every death sentence in the Russian Federation was commuted to life imprisonment, including Vladimir Nikolayev's. The firing squad was replaced with something else, something slower, something that would last for the rest of his natural life. He was sent to a place that few people outside the Russian penal system have ever seen. A place whose very existence seems designed to be forgotten. IK-6, Colonia, Cherny Delphin. The Black Dolphin. Now, to understand what that sentence actually means, you need to understand what life imprisonment looks like inside the Russian penal system. And specifically, what it looks like inside the Black Dolphin. In Russia, a life sentence is exactly what the words say. It is life. The entirety of it. There is a theoretical possibility of parole after 25 years, but in practice, as of the time of this recording, only one person in the entire history of the Russian Federation has ever been released through that mechanism. 1. Out of nearly 2,000 life sentence prisoners. The parole boards exist on paper. The process exists in law. But the door they describe has opened once in decades. And it has never opened for anyone held at the Black Dolphin. Some legal scholars have described it as a sentence written in permanent ink on a page that no one will ever revisit. Others have put it more simply. They say it is a death sentence carried out slowly, across decades, one day at a time. When a Russian court hands down this judgment, the convicted person is not sent to an ordinary prison. They are sent to one of a very small number of special regime colonies, facilities designed specifically and exclusively for those who will never leave. These institutions are located in some of the most remote regions of the country, far from cities, far from families, far, in many cases, from anything at all. And IK-6, the Black Dolphin, located in Sol-Iletsk in the Orenburg Oblast near the border with Kazakhstan, is the most severe of them all. It holds approximately 700 inmates. Every single one of them is serving a life sentence. Murderers, serial killers, terrorists, cannibals, men whose crimes were so extreme that the Russian state determined they could never, under any circumstances, be permitted to walk free again. And once you enter the Black Dolphin, the system is designed to ensure you never leave. Not through the gate, only through the morgue. The arrival process at the Black Dolphin is designed to communicate a single message, and that message is understood immediately, without anyone needing to say it aloud. You are no longer a person. You are a number inside a system, and the system does not care about you. The journey itself is brutal. Prisoners are transported across Russia in specialized railway cars known as Stolopin cars, metal compartments with barred windows, overcrowded, unheated in winter, sweltering in summer. The trip can take weeks. The destination is not always disclosed. The prisoner sits in chains, surrounded by strangers, moving towards something he cannot see and cannot prepare for. Upon arrival at the Black Dolphin, the prisoner is blindfolded. This is not temporary. The blindfold remains in place throughout the entire intake process. He is led, unable to see, through corridors he will never be permitted to map. The disorientation is intentional. The prisoner must never understand the layout of the facility, must never know where the exits are, must never, even in his imagination, conceive of a route to freedom. He is stripped of every personal item. Clothing is replaced with a black uniform. The head is shaved. Identifying information is logged, photographed, and filed. The individual is given a designation, a number. From that moment forward, every interaction with every guard, every official, every medical worker will be conducted through that designation. The name your mother gave you becomes secondary to the number the state has assigned you. The prisoner is then escorted, and escorted is perhaps too gentle a word, through a series of checkpoints, each one deeper inside the facility. But the method of escort is unique to the Black Dolphin. The prisoner is handcuffed with his hands behind his back. The cuffs are pulled upward, forcing him to bend forward at the waist, nearly 90 degrees. A guard holds the chain, keeping it high. The prisoner must walk in this position, bent over, staring at the floor, unable to see where he is going, unable to see the faces of the guards, unable to see anything except concrete passing beneath his feet. Each door that closes behind you is a door that locks automatically. Each corridor is narrower than the one before. The light changes. The temperature changes. The smell changes. Everything about the sensory environment shifts, and it shifts in one direction only, toward control. You are searched. You are searched again. You are placed into a cell, and 3 steel doors close behind you, one after another. Bolt, lock, bolt, lock, bolt, lock. That sound, the sound of 3 high-security cell doors closing for the first time, is something that former inmates from facilities around the world have described in almost identical language. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is mechanical. A sequence of bolts sliding into position, locks engaging, 3 clicks. And yet every person who has heard it says the same thing. It is the loudest silence they have ever experienced. Because in that silence, you understand. This is real. This is permanent. And no one is coming to reverse it. Vladimir Nikolayev heard that sound in 1999, and then he began serving his sentence. That was 25 years ago. The daily life inside the Black Dolphin operates on a schedule that does not vary. It does not vary by day of the week. It does not vary by season. It does not vary by year. The routine is identical on Monday and on Saturday, in January and in July, in the first year of the sentence and in the 25th. The prisoner wakes at 6 in the morning. He is not awakened gently. A signal sounds. The prisoner must rise immediately, dress in the regulation uniform, and make the bed according to exact specifications. The bed must be made in a particular way, the blanket folded to precise measurements. The uniform must be worn in a particular way, every button fastened, every detail correct, and then the prisoner must stand, not sit, not rest, stand, beside the bed, hands at his sides or behind his back, facing forward. For the next 16 hours, until 10 o'clock at night, the prisoner is not permitted to sit on the bed, not permitted to lie down, not permitted to rest in any way that involves the bed. This is a rule unique to the Black Dolphin, and it is enforced without exception. Guards check constantly, violate the rule, and privileges are removed. Violate it repeatedly, and punishment follows. 16 hours. Standing. In a cell that measures roughly 2 meters by 3 meters. That is approximately 6.5 feet by 10 feet. The entire world, reduced to a space smaller than most people's bathrooms. Meals are delivered through a slot in the door 4 times per day. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a late meal. But every meal is the same. Soup. Thin soup. Barely flavored. Nutritionally calculated to sustain life and nothing more. There is no choice involved. There is no variation. Monday's soup tastes the same as Friday's soup. January's soup tastes the same as July's soup. The tray is slid through. The prisoner eats standing up or crouched on the floor. The tray is returned. For 22.5 to 23 hours per day, the prisoner remains inside the cell. The cell contains a bed, a toilet, a small table, and sometimes a shelf. That is the world. The entirety of it. For 90 minutes per day, the prisoner is permitted to exercise. But exercise does not mean a yard. It does not mean open air in any meaningful sense. It means being moved, under escort, in the bent-over position, blindfolded, to a small enclosed space. At the Black Dolphin, these are steel cages, roughly 3 meters by 4 meters. High walls. A metal grate overhead through which a narrow rectangle of sky is visible. The prisoner walks, back and forth, in a space not much larger than the cell itself. Alone. Always alone. There is no interaction with other prisoners. No conversation. No acknowledgement. Just 90 minutes of walking in a steel cage, and then the blindfold goes back on. The cuffs are raised, and the prisoner is bent forward and escorted back to his cell. There is no communal dining. There is no recreation room. There is no library. There are no phone calls. Visits from family, if they occur at all, are limited to 1 or 2 per year and are conducted through reinforced glass, with a guard present, and a strict time limit of 2 hours. Letters may be sent and received, but they are opened and read by prison officials before they reach either party. Every word examined. Every sentence scrutinized. Every 15 minutes, day and night, a guard looks through the observation slot in the cell door. Every 15 minutes. The prisoner is never unobserved. The prisoner is never fully alone and never fully with anyone. It is a condition that exists somewhere between solitude and surveillance, and it is one of the most psychologically corrosive environments ever designed. There is a question that people on the outside sometimes ask. They ask it casually, the way you might ask about a foreign country you've never visited. They ask, what do they do all day? The answer is almost too simple to believe. They stand. They wait. They wait for meals. They wait for the exercise hour. They wait for the guard's face to appear at the slot and then disappear again. They wait for 10 o'clock at night when they are finally permitted to lie down. They wait for sleep. They wait for morning. And then they stand again. Time, in a place like this, does not pass. It accumulates. It builds up around you like water rising in a sealed room. And there is no drain. The psychological research on long-term solitary confinement and what Vladimir Nikolayev has experienced for 25 years functionally qualifies as long-term solitary confinement, is extensive and deeply troubling. Decades of study across multiple countries and legal systems have produced remarkably consistent findings. The human mind is not built for this. Within weeks of entering extreme isolation, most individuals begin to experience measurable changes in cognitive function. Concentration deteriorates. Memory becomes unreliable. The ability to organize thoughts, to follow a logical sequence from beginning to end, begins to erode. Within months, deeper effects set in. Anxiety that has no specific source. A pervasive sense of dread that attaches to nothing and everything simultaneously. Hypersensitivity to sound. A guard's footstep 3 corridors away becomes deafening. Hypersensitivity to light. The small rectangle of sky visible through the cell window becomes too bright to look at, and then, paradoxically, becomes the only thing worth looking at. Within years, and we are talking about a sentence measured in decades, the effects become structural. The prisoner begins to lose the ability to engage in normal social interaction. Conversations become difficult. Eye contact becomes painful. The face of a visiting family member, seen once or twice a year through reinforced glass, begins to look unfamiliar. Not because the prisoner has forgotten who they are, but because the brain, deprived of regular human contact, begins to lose its ability to process faces, expressions, and emotional cues. The machinery of connection rusts from disuse. Some prisoners describe a phenomenon that has no clinical name, but is reported so frequently that researchers have come to recognize it as a near-universal feature of extreme long-term confinement. They describe the sensation of watching themselves from the outside, as though the person sitting on the concrete bed is someone else entirely, and the real self is hovering somewhere just above, watching but unable to intervene. It is a dissociative response. The mind, unable to escape the self physically, attempts to escape it psychologically. And then there is the question of identity. Who are you after 10 years in a cell? Who are you after 25? The things that define a person on the outside, their work, their relationships, their choices, their movement through the world, all of those are gone. What remains? A name that no one uses, a number that everyone does, a body that ages in a space where nothing else changes, and a mind that slowly, imperceptibly, begins to forget what it was like to be whole. Vladimir Nikolayev entered this system as a man with a past, a history, a voice, a face that people recognized. Year by year, the system did what it was designed to do. It reduced him, not through violence, not through dramatic cruelty, through something far more efficient, through monotony, through silence, through the relentless, grinding repetition of identical days until the days themselves become meaningless, and the person living through them begins to wonder whether they, too, have become meaningless. If this is the kind of documentary that makes you think, if these are the stories that stay with you after the screen goes dark, then you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel was built for. There are more cases like this one, more stories from behind walls that most of us will never see. If you want to hear them, subscribing is the simplest way to make sure you do. And if there is a case, a prison, or a question about life inside these systems that you want explored, leave it in the comments. Because the truth is, these stories exist whether we tell them or not. The only question is whether anyone is listening. Now, here is something that people outside the prison system rarely consider, and it may be the most disorienting aspect of a life sentence. The world does not stop. Inside the cell, nothing changes. The walls are the same. The schedule is the same. The view through the window, that small rectangle of sky, is the same. But outside, everything changes. The Soviet Union, the country Vladimir Nikolayev was born in, no longer exists. The Russia he knew in 1997, when he committed his crimes, has transformed beyond recognition. Governments have risen and fallen. Technologies have been invented that reshape daily life. The street where he once lived has been repaved, rebuilt, renamed. Children who were infants at the time of his sentencing have grown up, gone to school, gotten married, had children of their own. Parents age. Parents become ill. Parents pass away. And the prisoner learns about all of it, if he learns at all, through a letter that has been opened and read by someone else before it reaches his hands. Imagine receiving a letter that tells you your mother has passed away. Imagine receiving that letter in a cell where you have been standing for 12 years. Imagine that you cannot attend the funeral. You cannot say goodbye. You cannot hold anyone. You cannot be held. You read the words. You fold the letter. You place it on the small shelf beside your bed. And then the guard's face appears at the observation slot, the way it does every 15 minutes. And the day continues exactly as it did before, as though nothing happened. Because inside the system, nothing did. 5 years pass, then 10, then 15, then 20, then 25. The prisoner begins to lose the ability to conceptualize time in the way that free people do. A year no longer feels like a year. It feels like a single long day that never quite ends. Seasons are theoretical. Weather is something that happens to other people. The prisoner knows that winter has come because the cell is colder. He knows that summer has arrived because it is slightly less cold. But the lived experience of seasons, the smell of rain, the feel of wind, the shift in light that tells your body the earth has tilted, all of that is gone. Some long-term inmates report that after a certain number of years, the number varies, but it is usually somewhere between 8 and 15, something inside them simply stops. Not dramatically, not suddenly, quietly, like a clock that has been running in an empty room for so long that one day the spring finally gives out. And the hands just stop moving and nobody notices because nobody was watching. They stop planning. They stop hoping. They stop projecting themselves into the future because the future is identical to the present and the present is identical to the past. The mental architecture that human beings use to navigate time. The ability to remember yesterday as different from today, to imagine tomorrow as potentially different from both, collapses. And what replaces it is not peace. It is not acceptance. It is a kind of cognitive stillness that resembles death more than it resembles life. Vladimir Nikolayev has lived inside this reality for a quarter of a century. His body has aged. His world has not expanded. The boundaries of his existence can be measured in footsteps, and the number of footsteps has not changed. In 2006, 7 years into his sentence, Vladimir Nikolayev gave an interview to a journalist who had gained rare access to the Black Dolphin. The interview was brief. The questions were controlled, but the prisoner was asked one thing directly. He was asked whether, given the choice, he would prefer life imprisonment or the death penalty he was originally sentenced to. His answer was immediate, unambiguous. He said that every life prisoner should have the right to choose between life imprisonment and the death penalty. And if given that choice, he would choose death. That statement has stayed in the record. It has been quoted in human rights reports, in academic studies, in documentaries about the Russian penal system. And it raises a question that surfaces periodically in legal philosophy, in human rights discourse, and in the quiet conversations that prisoners themselves have through the walls when they think no one is listening. The question is simple in its framing and impossible in its resolution. Is this worse than death? It is a question that resists easy answers, and it should, because it forces us to confront what we believe about consciousness, about suffering, about the purpose of punishment, and about the limits of what one human being should be permitted to do to another, even in the name of justice. Those who say that life imprisonment in extreme isolation is a fate worse than death make an argument that is difficult to dismiss. They point out that death, whatever else it may be, is an ending. It is final. It is not experienced as ongoing suffering because it is not experienced at all. But a life sentence in extreme confinement is experienced. Every minute of it. Every hour. Every year. For decades. The prisoner is conscious. The prisoner is aware. The prisoner feels time moving through him like a blade that never quite finishes its cut. A death sentence, they argue, asks a person to face one terrible moment. A life sentence in these conditions asks a person to face tens of thousands of terrible moments, one after another, with no promise that any of them will be the last. Others counter that life, in any form, retains value. That consciousness itself is sacred. That even inside a cell, the human mind is capable of thought, of reflection, of whatever internal life a person can sustain. And that to equate imprisonment with death is to diminish the gravity of death itself. The prisoners themselves, the ones who have spoken, the ones whose words have been recorded and studied, do not speak in philosophical terms. They speak plainly. And what many of them say, when asked directly, is that they are not living, but they are not allowed to stop. That is not a statement that should be passed over quickly. It deserves to sit in the air for a moment, to be felt rather than analyzed, because it tells us something about the outer edge of human endurance that statistics and policy papers cannot capture. A man in a cell, a man who is conscious, a man who remembers what it felt like to walk without an escort, to eat at a table he chose, to hear a voice that was not giving him an order, a man who knows, with certainty, that none of those things will ever happen again, and who wakes up tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, into the same knowledge, the same walls, the same rectangle of sky. That is not rehabilitation. It is not correction. It is not even punishment in the way that most people understand the word. It is something else entirely. Something that we have built and maintained and funded and looked away from. Because looking directly at it requires us to answer questions that we are not sure we want to ask. In 2007, National Geographic was granted unprecedented access to film inside the Black Dolphin. The resulting documentary, titled Russia's Toughest Prisons, showed the world what life imprisonment in a special regime colony actually looks like. The bent-over escorts, the blindfolds, the steel cages, the three-door cells, and the prisoners themselves. Vladimir Nikolayev appeared in that documentary. Briefly, on camera, speaking through an interpreter, he was asked about his crimes. And as he spoke, he smiled. He laughed, not nervously, not uncomfortably, but as though recounting something amusing, something trivial. The journalists who filmed him gave him a nickname. They called him the Laughing Cannibal. That footage has been seen by millions of people, and the reaction is almost always the same: revulsion, anger, a sense that whatever happens to this man inside that prison, he deserves it, that he has forfeited any claim to sympathy, that the suffering, if he suffers, is justice. And perhaps that is true. Perhaps the moral calculus is simple. Perhaps the crimes he committed were so far beyond the boundaries of acceptable human behavior that the system's response, however extreme, is proportional. But the question the documentary asks is not whether Vladimir Nikolayev deserves compassion. It is whether the system we have built to contain him is one that we, as a society, should be comfortable maintaining. Whether the architecture of permanent psychological destruction applied to anyone reveals something about us that we should be willing to examine. Because the Black Dolphin does not exist in isolation. It is part of a larger structure, a philosophy of punishment that has been replicated in different forms, in different countries, under different legal systems. Supermax facilities in the United States, high-security units in the United Kingdom, special regime colonies across Russia. Everywhere, the same basic principle. Some people are too dangerous, or too despised, or too broken to ever be allowed back into the world. And so we remove them, permanently, completely. And we try not to think too hard about what that removal actually looks like on a day-to-day basis. The doors close, the locks engage, and the person inside becomes invisible. Vladimir Nikolayevich Nikolayev is still alive. At least, as of the most recent information available, his body continues to function inside a cell at IK-6, the Black Dolphin, in Sol-Iletsk, Russia. His heart beats. His lungs draw air. His eyes open each morning at 6, when the signal sounds, and he rises from his bed to begin another day of standing. He is now 65 years old. He has been inside the Black Dolphin for 25 years. If he lives to the average life expectancy for a Russian male, he has perhaps 10 to 15 years remaining. All of them will be spent in that cell, standing beside that bed, walking in that steel cage, watching that rectangle of sky. Whether the person who entered that cell in 1999 still exists inside the body that remains, whether the identity, the self, the thing that makes a human being rather than simply an organism, whether that has survived the years of silence and concrete and observation slots and identical days stacked one upon the other like bricks in an endless wall. That is a question that no one outside those walls can answer with certainty. What we can say is this. Somewhere in southern Russia, in a building that most people will never see, in a corridor where sound does not travel the way it should, there is a man standing beside a concrete bed. He has been standing there for hours already today, and he will stand for many more hours before he is permitted to lie down. And tomorrow, when the signal sounds at 6 in the morning and the day begins again, exactly as it began today, and yesterday, and the day before that, and every day stretching back through years that have blurred into a single unbroken moment, he will rise. He will dress. He will make his bed according to exact specifications. And the rectangle of sky in his window will show him the only piece of the world he has left. Whether he still looks at it, I don't know. Whether it still matters to him, I don't know that either. But it is there, every morning. A small, indifferent square of light that does not know his name, does not know his number, does not know what he did or what was done to him. It simply exists, the way the sky has always existed, vast and open and completely beyond reach. And somewhere beneath it, behind 3 steel doors and concrete and law and time, a man continues to breathe. That may be the most unsettling sentence in this entire story. Not that he suffers, not that he is confined, but that he continues. And no one, not the court, not the guards, not the system that holds him, can tell you exactly what that continuation means, or whether it should be called living. This has been a documentary examination of extreme long-term incarceration at IK-6 Black Dolphin, a special regime colony in the Russian penal system. The facts presented are based on publicly available legal records. The National Geographic documentary, Russia's Toughest Prisons, 2007, verified interviews with Vladimir Nikolayevich Nikolayev, academic research into solitary confinement and its psychological effects, and documented accounts of conditions in Russian special regime facilities. No portion of this script is intended to minimize the severity of the offenses for which the subject was convicted, nor to diminish the experience of those affected by those offenses. It is intended only to look carefully, honestly, and without flinching at what happens on the other side of the verdict. Because that, too, is part of the story. whether we choose to hear it or not.